Welcome back. China is arming up to protect its economy from the ongoing trade tensions with the US. The country has announced a series of measures to stabilize employment and is fully confident of achieving its annual growth target of 5%. China's top economic planning body said that the country will implement a scheme to boost consumption and set up a venture capital guidance fund by June. China also plans to help companies pivot to the domestic market. China has already allocated 160 billion yuan to boost domestic consumption. Another 140 billion yuan investment is expected to follow. To discuss this, joining us on the show is Curtis Chin, former US ambassador to the Asian Development Bank and senior fellow at the Milken Institute. Thank you very much, Ambassador Chin, for joining us. Let me begin by asking you, Chinese exporters are likely to be the worst hit as a result of the US-China tariff war. Will these measures by the Chinese government be enough to protect them?
You know, time will tell, but my gut is we'll continue to see China roll out additional steps to protect the domestic economy. You know, whether it's the United States or China, clearly it's all about a domestic audience. And I was struck by your opening comments that talked about, you know, China's trying to do everything it can to get approximately the 5% growth that they have projected. But just a few days ago, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, came out with its latest GDP projections for China and have lowered it to 4% for both this year and next year. So you believe the IMF, you believe China, but clearly everything is in flux. And I think both the United States and China, let alone every country that's dealing with these proposed tariffs, are trying to figure out what to do next.
Right. Ambassador Chin, do you also feel that, you know, we were just discussing in the earlier segment how China has stopped the supply of rare earth minerals to countries around the world and made this into a non-tariff barrier. Do you feel that some of the domestic economic measures will include, subsidizing the domestic manufacturing even more and creating more barriers for companies dependent on Chinese suppliers?
You know, it's still continuing to play out, but I think when you look at anything that China might do, you need to focus on the whole issue of stability. I mean, that is the critical challenge for China right now. If you think about the near-term impact of tariffs, of China's steps, you need to think through in terms of domestic employment, what happens to those Chinese workers, no fault of their own, that find themselves without income and a job. You know, and I think more than any major country in the world, you know, China puts the emphasis on stability. I think each side, China and the United States, are really trying to wait out each other. Who will bear the most pain in the near term? And what was really striking also about your last segment was, again, the difference between the short-term challenge and really the medium-term consequences of these actions, which we mix for all nations involved. For China, as one of your commentators noted, it makes them a less reliable partner. Just exactly what some people have said about the United States. And so what it means, I'm based in Southeast Asia, it means Southeast Asian nations, other nations will need to think through the importance of diversification away from China, maybe away from the US too, as key markets or key sources of these kind of intermediate elements that go into products that countries make and then seek to export.
Right. And this is a story that you've also been following very closely, Ambassador Chin, as to how Apple is considering making India the production hub for all phones for the US market especially. Now, considering this trade war has broken off and you've got these tariff wars and China also imposing a lot of restrictions, do you think India will have an advantage? Will India see more manufacturing coming as a result of US-China trade tensions?
Well, you know, as a big fan of India, I mean, I think that is all of our hope as we think about diversification of manufacturing away from, single markets. I've seen reports already, is China slowing the export, the ability to move some of that knowledge, that manufacturing knowledge from companies, manufacturing lines in China, kind of stalling or delaying that movement to India. No, again, these are all short-term actions. Ultimately, things will shift. We saw that even during the pandemic. The reality of supply chains did shift away from China also to nations like in Southeast Asia, like Vietnam. That continues even though the pandemic, of course, has faded. And so this trade war will end. I think we can all guess when it might end. For me, it's when there is a face-saving way out of this situation for all the major players. And when that happens, the reality is that steps being taken by companies to shift away from China, to shift into an India or elsewhere, those steps will continue to play out in terms of decisions made now. For the short term, they're really going to play out in the long term.
Right. Another point that companies and nations look at while considering any investment is how secure is that country? How safe are the investments there? What is the impact of terrorism and international trends? Now we've seen a very gruesome, ghastly attack in Jammu and Kashmir. You've been following that very closely. And India has drawn a clear linkage between Pakistani state actors, the government, and the terrorists who were involved. How do you think this attack on Indian civilians impacts the investment sentiment towards India?
I think for me, and let's hope that it's true, that this is a short-term situation. I certainly stand with the U.S. president and others around the world who expressed their support for India in this situation. The reality is, when I look at all these countries that I deal with in Asia, concerns about terrorism. Here in Thailand, we just had the impact of an earthquake in Myanmar. People are worried in the short term. But the key will be these weeks and months ahead. How will these things play out? For me, the bigger story, we talk about all these headlines right now, the bigger story is the reality that India will also need to think about markets, beyond China, beyond the United States. Actually happening right now, I think, as you've been following also, in Mumbai is the first major summit of something called IMEC, which is like an India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, trying to increase connectivity between India through the Gulf and then on to Europe. I'm based mainly in Southeast Asia. The Milken Institute is based in Singapore, but I'm right at this moment in Thailand, where I support a terrific company called Equator Pure Nature, which just has launched from Thailand into India. This is a company that produces a line of all natural consumer products, laundry detergent, body wash. But what is most critical is that Thailand has lessons learned from its dealing with issues like pollution, concerns about the environment. And I think, as you know well, these are also concerns that take place right now in India, worries about the environment, worries about pollution. So I think India is very smart to partner and to look at opportunities for products and services that they might export to Southeast Asia, westward to the Middle East. Likewise, welcoming
Ambassador Chin. Right. Ambassador Chin, on the IMEC corridor, that's a very important point. Keeping in mind the current circumstances, the CPEC, or the Belt and Road Initiative, has been a major cause for concern in India for many years now. This makes the IMEC even more important. In the current geopolitical environment, do you think there is appetite to speed up the execution of this project? Are we going to see eye to eye with different countries? What kind of lead does India need to take?
Well, I think, IMEC was really launched on the sidelines of the G20. India had a terrific, successful G20, but the test is always what comes of it, what happens with these programs. Whether it's a direct rival to China's Belt and Road Initiative, the reality is that there is a need for greater infrastructure finance throughout Asia. There's a greater need for digital connectivity. So I say, bring it on. I think nations can benefit from all of these efforts, but clearly nations also have to look at the bottom line in these contracts. I'm in and out of South Asia. I remember when I was in Sri Lanka, there's talk, are the China programs debt aid or are they debt traps? Countries will know best kind of the fine print. And my hope is that transparency is what is key, whether it's an IMEC project or a Belt and Road project. Clearly there's a need in this region, and what we need is projects that are transparent, that are more accountable to increase that connectivity. I'm always struck that when I look at the regions of Asia more broadly, South Asia is probably one of the least connected. There was an op-ed I read out of India that talked about maybe India needs to think of itself as an island. And what did they mean? They meant, of course, trade with Pakistan is relatively limited. Trade north with China has its concerns. So they need to look at greater development of ports and air connectivity to the southeast and elsewhere in the region. But there is opportunity there. I think U.S.-India relations continue to be very well, and I hope they continue to be built on.
All right, Ambassador Chin, thank you so much. We've completely run out of time. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of News Center. More news and updates continue right here.